Oh boy. When I stand up at these places, my anxiety level goes up immediately when there's anything I have to do technology-wise. So thank you to all of my partners in the room who set this up so well. My name is Lisa O'Brien, and I am the Executive Director of Taos Housing Partnership. And I want to welcome you and thank you for coming tonight. This has been an incredible year and a half. It's been an incredible summer, and it's been an incredible day today. So I want to just share very quickly that Taos Housing Partnership came to be out of lots of community conversation, and this, as a nonprofit, we've been around officially as a nonprofit since March of this year. But this conversation around housing started in 2021. So a lot of what we did today, I had a great board work session with my board of directors, and I'll ask if there are any board members. I saw one. Will you please stand up if you're on the Taos Housing Partnership board? Catherine, Mark. We did a work session this morning, and the agreement is that housing is complex, and housing is complicated, and housing is not easy. So if there's anyone in this room who would disagree with that, you're welcome to come up to the podium, because we're trying to figure this out as best we can. Yes, sir?
I'll take that opportunity on another occasion. Thank you.
Okay, terrific. I appreciate it. So to get us started for tonight, today is a really cool evening because we're doing two things. One, we're really taking off with our community engagement series. I have been the executive director for not quite a year and a half. We started on this adventure saying, okay, let's do 4 community learning sessions for the general public, for the community on a quarterly basis. And this, I think, is the 3rd one we've done. Tonight's a really special one because we sort of opened our doors a little bit, and we have a speaker coming in from Albuquerque, and I'll introduce Carlos in a minute. But the other thing we wanted to do tonight is we wanted to do a premiere of our media campaign. When I started as the executive director, and I'm the first one to always stand up and say, I know nothing about housing, this learning curve for me has been very, very high. We have an incredible team of people. So Taos Housing Partnership, if you look at the program, is the staff, Lisa O'Brien and Alexandra Goldman, I want to point out. It's a team of 2. But we have a huge team of people that assist us in our work. And I want to recognize a couple of those folks in the room. Daniel Werwath, if you can stand up real quick. Daniel is the Senior Housing Policy Advisor with the Governor's Office. And Daniel started on this adventure with us when he was not at the Governor's Office. So I like to tell the story that I have a foot and a heel and a hip and an elbow in the Governor's Office. Daniel has been incredible with us in terms of kind of getting things rolling. I have a couple other board members that have walked in. I can't say enough to our funding partners, so I want to thank Sonia Struck, who also sat down in the front row, if you look in the back. Sonia's with the Lohr Foundation. They are funding our community engagement work for this first year out of the gate. Thank you for doing that work with us right off the bat. We do have elected officials and key staff members from the town, the county, and the village of Cuesta, so I'll ask if those folks can just stand up, please, and just be recognized, because this housing effort is everybody. It's not one organization. I realized very quickly probably in January, that when we started to talk about housing needs, what inevitably happened is everyone had a great idea about what we needed to do. And I say the we as a community. And it was fun for me. I started on a Monday, and on Thursday I had probably 25 people that had emailed, called, stopped by and said, Lisa, what you should do. And then the laundry list started. And I remember in those moments going like, oh geez, I have an awful lot to learn. And what I can tell you is that when I started to go through that laundry list, it was like, yep, can't do that, yep, can't do that, nope, can't do that. Housing is very complex. And Taos Housing Partnership came to be because of the complexity. So I can't stress enough, if you have not seen our 3-year roadmap on our website, please check it out. I do have a couple copies tonight. This is sort of like the running version of how Taos Housing Partnership came to be. It was with elected officials, it was with key stakeholders, it was with nonprofit leaders, it was with philanthropic partners, and the agreement was we needed a nonprofit that would stand alone to work on affordable housing. So here we are. The other piece that we recognized really fast is that there's this wonderful space where folks say, yes, Lisa, we need affordable housing. And then the very next thing is, but I think it needs to be like way over there. And I don't want it to look like this. And what we realized is that we really needed to start a conversation that was about why do we need, what is housing? What do we need in housing? How are we going to get there? Because we can't do it by ourselves. So we went out, and I want to acknowledge Mary Emery from the Taos County Association of Realtors. Mary was one of the first folks who called Taos Housing Partnership when we first started, and she said, I want to get you funding. I said, okay. And we weren't quite ready. So we were ready when we were ready, and what we went to TCAR with, and Mary was instrumental with helping us get a grant from the National Association of Realtors, was to do a concerted media campaign. So what you will see tonight is the premiere of 2 of our 5 videos. And this is a really cool thing. I'm going to ask everybody in the room who's in, if you were interviewed as a stakeholder, local voice, will you please stand up? Because I see James in the back, and I see other board members, and Carlos Miller is here from college who came back. We went out to our community and said, would you please come and be interviewed? And I want to give a nod to True Kids One. They're all the great folks up in the back. They did this production of these videos, and they're spectacular. So part of our dissemination plan is we're not just going to like throw them all out into the wind. So we're gonna throw these out, put these out very strategically into community. So you will see 2 of them tonight. There are 5 in total. And over the next month, we will be putting those out. We will be at a county commission meeting. We will be at a town council meeting. We're scheduled to be at the village council in Cuesta. And we're then going to start getting out into our partners. So what you will see in this video is local voices. They're people you recognize who are talking about why housing matters. My challenge and my ask of all of you tonight, 2 things. One is I would like everyone to leave this room with 2 things in your head. One, that you walk out with one thing that you didn't know that you learned tonight. I had no idea. And the second one is what are you going to do when you leave tonight to be part of our housing solution? Because I will tell you, every single person in this room has the ability to be part of our solution and community. And that can be something like reading a book that we have a book recommendation list. It could be attending our next community learning session. It could be attending one of Alexandra's, oh God, I'm gonna forget the name.
Housing Advocacy and Learning Group.
Yes, Housing Advocacy and Learning Group. We're doing it on a monthly basis. Who's attended one of those? Great, 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 great. No, there's no topic, there's no presenter, it's open conversation. So it was a way for us to kind of go, what are people thinking about? What are we talking about? So Taos Housing Partnership is gonna start with these 2 videos. We're gonna have Carlos here tonight. I hope we have time for Q&A. I'm gonna encourage everybody, there's a cue card thing on the back. This is Lisa Learning, I didn't even know what it was called. Go to Taos Housing Partnership. There's some action steps that you could sign up to do. You could read more of our material, and you can learn a little bit more about how we, as a community, are gonna move this muscle forward on housing. And every single one of us has a piece in this conversation tonight, okay? One thing I learned, and what am I gonna do when I walk out? And here I go. I'm gonna go back 10, and I'm gonna press play.
Housing has affected my quality of life and my desire to even be in Taos, period. And I love this town, but it's hard to live in a town that you can't even find a place to live.
In 2018, I had my son, and I wasn't able to find a place to live despite having an almost perfect credit score, perfect rental history.
I think personally, I'm seeing the challenge that one of my sons is having. He is trying to come back to his hometown, but can't afford a home, cannot afford even to purchase land here in Taos County.
I'm paid competitively, as are our staff and physicians on a national level. I can't afford a home.
I've barely just moved out of my parents' home like 2 months ago. And it was something that I've been wanting to do for a while, but like I said, there's a lack of housing everywhere within Taos, and what I could find was completely out of my budget. My dad is an ongoing alcoholic and drug addict, and it's been extremely difficult to live in the same home as him.
I deserve to be able to afford to live in Taos, but I also deserve to be able to afford to live in a place that isn't falling apart. I don't deserve to live in a place with a rat infestation because there isn't a floor in one of the rooms.
Housing is something that underpins so many other things that we work on in the community sector.
The mental state of somebody who's moving a lot is definitely unstable. Higher risk of anxiety, higher risk of depression, higher risk of suicidality.
Our leadership knows of all of these addiction and domestic violence issues. And I feel like a lot of these could be worked on just with housing alone.
All the social determinants of health, whether it's housing or food security or behavioral health care, they impact each other.
I'm working with folks who are looking to access education, not even for the sake of education, but just looking for a place to live.
I don't own a home because I haven't been able to beat the revenue versus cost puzzle.
We can't bring people in because they can't find housing. So housing for all of us, that's the vibrancy. And that has to happen. We're going to have housing across the landscape.
The biggest need to tackle is how do we house the unhoused? How do we house better the unsecured housed?
Statistically, we know that at least 100 people are homeless on any given night in our county. Everybody thinks these people are from somewhere else. They're not our people. And what we have found at Nest is that the vast majority of people who are coming in and spending the night have been in Taos for over 10 years. These are people that are our neighbors, our family members, our cousins.
I was very young when my journey with homelessness started. The climb out of homelessness is very difficult, especially if the housing in your area is not affordable.
For tonight. I'm going to have Carlos talk a little bit more about his work, but Carlos Gemora is here with us from Albuquerque. He's done a lot of work in Santa Fe and in the Albuquerque area, and what he's going to talk us through tonight is Housing Economics 101. So all of you who need to go back to high school economics or college economics, you can fast track on this one tonight. So Carlos, thank you for coming up.
Thank you all. As Lisa said, my name's Carlos. First, I'd like to give Lisa a hand. Lisa has been working with the Taos Housing Partnership, and the more I've learned about what Taos has already got going on and what the community has been working on, I think it's really amazing how the community started working on this. So yeah, I want to start just giving Lisa. As Lisa said, my name's Carlos Gemora. I work with a lot of communities around New Mexico on how to assess housing, how to think about some of the major issues. how to look into housing from a regulatory perspective, how to think about housing economics, how to try to tackle a lot of shortage issues, how to understand community vision, and then how local municipalities, counties, state, nonprofits can try to start to think about some of their strategies. Tonight I'm going to talk about how housing can work in an ideal market state, how the housing shortage works, how the market works when we've got shortage conditions, and then I'm also going to talk about some of the local levers we have to address some of those issues. Something that I think is a really important disclaimer, I'm not from Taos. I don't know all the Taos details. If we've got questions on some of that, I'm just going to bring Lisa up on some of that. There will be some time for questions afterwards. I'll also try to pause at some point so we could try to, make sure that we're understanding some of the main concepts here. Let me start here. Ideal market supply. So I like thinking about an ideal kind of housing supply. Here I've got a bunch of families in a bunch of houses, okay? And they all have happy faces because they're all living in the type of house they want to live in. The top here, $3, that's whatever. Let's just think about that as high income, moderate income, low income, extremely low income. Again, the details don't really matter. The idea is that this is a visual model that we could kind of start to think about how do people inhabit different kinds of homes. At the bottom end here, non-market based and subsidized housing. So when we're talking about a housing market, there's always going to be groups that just don't have enough money, right? So this is the $half sign. They're never going to have enough money to participate in market, kind of the private market kind of housing. And so this is always going to require some degree of this, okay? That's always going to exist in a private market. The hope is that it's not the whole market. When we're talking about ideal supply strategies, we could look kind of at the top end here. Usually for a market to provide, high-end housing, it's new, luxury, market kind of development. Usually private markets can provide that pretty well. Down here at the kind of moderate, the $2 kind of housing, right? Older, maybe it's a little bit older, or it's decent market rate, right? Sometimes still private markets can kind of provide some of this stuff. As we move down, sometimes, to get cheaper housing, it's even older. Maybe it's just satisfactory, and it's a little bit more difficult to provide. And then again, at the bottom here, a lot of this is stuff that isn't really provided by the market. A lot of people, for very good reasons, bring up, why are we always talking about private markets, right? I don't like private markets. I want to talk about community housing, public housing. I want to talk about altruistic. I don't want to talk about housing as a private, for-profit kind of money-making market. That's totally fine. I'm not saying that this is how housing should work. I'm not saying that this is the ideal way that housing has to work. This is how housing usually works. This is the majority of the housing that we have. Now, there's a lot of mom and pops that could have housing, and instead of having $1,200 of rent, they decide to have it cheaper because they want to have a nice person in there. There's a lot of people who are altruistic when they're doing things like this. I'm not talking about that. There's a lot of opportunities for public housing, nonprofit housing, housing that is not, again, not based on the kind of business kind of model. Not talking about that stuff either, okay? The majority of our housing is working like a private market. And we have to kind of just understand what are the shortages, what are the problems with that, how do we understand that? So that's what I'm going to kind of get into a little bit more of, okay? So it's not all of housing, nowhere near all of housing. It's just understanding a lot of the majority of the market supply. Thought of another way. So ideally, how a housing market could work is that new construction comes in and it's pretty expensive, okay? Over time, the value depreciates because things get worn out or it just becomes old and, kind of outdated design. Value increases happen when you actually are improving the property, okay? So this is one way that you could kind of have the housing market work. where it's naturally depreciating. So it comes in kind of at the top end of the market, naturally depreciates. Eventually, you have housing that kind of leaves the market. It's demolished, it gets torn up. Property improvements actually increase that value, and so you have to kind of put money into it to actually increase that value. There's a term here, naturally occurring affordable housing. Some people call it NOAA. The idea is that if you could get housing that just naturally becomes affordable, that's kind of the key. And that's what we've been able to kind of have in the past, but for quite a few reasons, this isn't working as it is ideal, right? Again, this is ideal market. This isn't necessarily how it always is working. Another way to kind of think about the housing market is we could divide it into two different ways. We could think about housing as a utilitarian good, and we could think about housing as an investment. Okay? So here I've got a little yellow thing, the cost of things or income or other stuff, right? And so this is kind of going up a little bit. If we have it as a utilitarian good, the value of utilitarian goods is based on the existing functional value, okay? So think about cars, right? A car doesn't have a lot of value sitting in a garage. Tools don't have a lot of value just sitting around. Power plants, electronics, right? Those things, they've got a value, and so the value is that you could use them. For housing, if housing is a utilitarian good, the value of housing is that somebody can live there, right? That would be how we think of housing as a good. If housing was a good, though, we would have it where it depreciates somewhat quickly, and then a little bit slower, right? But we'd have that depreciation kind of built into it as a good. Housing doesn't always work that way, though, right? This could be a good model for it to become affordable, but again, it doesn't really work that way that often. A lot of times we're thinking about housing as an investment, okay? Sometimes it's a really good investment, sometimes it's a great investment, sometimes it's not a good investment. But if it's an investment, the value of the item is speculative. So we're speculating that housing is going to be worth more in the future, and so the value is that we think it's going to be worth more in the future. Stocks and bonds. It doesn't actually do you almost any good to actually hold stocks and bonds. Baseball cards, gold, right? These are examples of speculative goods, of things that we're trying to invest in. A lot of times, we're actually thinking about housing as an investment that's really good, and so that value is going up. But as soon as the value is separating from the cost of other things and income, this is unaffordable. This is an unaffordable way. This is not a sustainable way for investments in goods to work. This is how we've been trying to make housing work for a lot of people for a while, and it's difficult. It's really difficult to keep this working. You could also have kind of a blend, right? So like a savings account would be like a blend, right? It's kind of increasing a little bit, kind of not increasing. But it's good, I think, to still kind of separate these within, again, on one side, if housing was a good, it would be depreciating, and it would be a little bit easier to get affordable. If it's an investment, it could be really good for people who own it, but it makes it harder and harder to kind of enter the market. This is some of the ideal ways that markets could work. I'm going to go into how housing is not working in an ideal way, and then talk about the levers that local communities have. Before I get into that, and again, we also have questions at the end. Are there quick questions people have on some of the ideal market conditions? Questions about how we're thinking about housing as a market, as an ideal market. Anything? Anything? Yes?
So what's the root? When have we seen this switch? How do we tie this into the U.S. economic history?
Yeah, long ago. In the 1600s, in the 1700s, in the 1800s, 1900s, housing was probably a little bit more like a good, right? You build a house, it depreciates, it starts kind of falling apart, whatever, you're kind of building it into it. It's not as much of that kind of like typical, like we've got this complex market and all this stuff. In the U.S., we've built a lot of our economy on, we want people to be able to put money into a market, and we want them to be able to make money off of housing, right? So we've made investment in housing one of the main ways that communities can actually build wealth and retire and things like that, right? And so we've tried to kind of support that. A lot of post-war has been around the home ownership kind of model. So we've really been pushing this. And then we've started using regulation to artificially create these kinds of conditions. But this means that housing has been becoming unaffordable for decades and decades and decades. We haven't always seen it, right? But if we talk about, if we talk to people who have looked at housing in the 1920s and the 1950s or the 1980s, by now it's generally gotten less affordable. Does that? Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. So as Lisa was saying, housing is not ideal, right? Housing is really complicated. How things have worked have been really difficult. Red hot. Incomes haven't caught up. Prices are soaring. Opposition. There's a lot of difficulties that we've actually been dealing with all around communities. A lot of these headlines are from Taos News. Some of them are from other places, but this is not unique to Taos. These are difficulties that a lot of communities are facing. Some of the things are unique and unpredictable, okay? So you think about COVID, right? Some people are like, oh, the real problem is some of these things, right? We've had construction cost increases, supply chain, labor unavailability, interest rate has doubled. Post-COVID, there was a lot of opposition to different kinds of housing. This has led to less development, higher costs, okay? But this isn't everything. This has happened. This has made it more difficult. But these are also some of these unique things that are always coming out with different conditions. Long term, we've been looking at shrinking federal funding for affordable housing, a loss of existing social housing, so social and public housing has started to get phased out, hasn't been rebuilt. Building affordable housing is getting more and more expensive over the decades. Different kinds of design requirements, regulatory requirements has been making it pretty expensive. Housing's also been a pretty good investment for a lot of people that have actually owned it. And again, something about the investment side is that if housing is a good investment, it's not just the utilitarian good. It means that other groups might want to come in and invest in housing, not because it's a house, right? Not because it could house somebody. They're interested in housing as an investment, not as a home. It's not about whether somebody actually lives there. It's about, I'm going to buy some property because it's going to go up 30% over the next couple of years. I'm going to invest in housing because it's better than the stock market, right? It gets dangerous. It gets really dangerous. What this has led is that over long term, right, when we're talking about kind of 1920s, 1950s, 1970s, long term, we've been getting less availability of housing and higher costs. These are long-term trends that we're dealing with. In Taos, 36% increase in the median housing sales price between 2020 and 2023. That's huge, right? So this is really good. If you bought in 2020, if you bought a home in 2020, this is awesome. This is great, right? I bought a home, not in Taos, but I bought a home in 2021, right? My home went up 30% in the last couple years, right? That feels great as a homeowner. That's horrible for anybody else, okay? So homeowners, we've got it good, right? We've been riding this wave. This is an awesome wave that we're riding. It's not good for the community. It's not good for the whole market. And if we're interested in it, then hedge fund investors in New York City are also interested in it. Texans are interested in it. Californians are interested in it. Private property companies are interested. All these other companies are interested in this, again, not because it's a home, but because it's an investment. Here's one community I was working with. We looked at an affordability gap, okay? Here's another way we could think about this. So yellow line, the median single family sales price. The blue line, what's affordable for a median income household, okay? So the average household can afford this blue line over time. Average home is this yellow line over time. Okay, so in 2012, we were looking at the gap. The gap in 2012, $102,000. Okay, so if you are getting a builder, the average home they're building, and this is, again, this is also sales price, okay? So sales price includes the brand new mansion and it includes the home that has a roof that's falling down, okay? This isn't just all the new homes, this isn't necessarily nice homes, like this is all of the homes being sold. Average home getting sold is $410. Average affordability for median income is $308, okay? So if you are a public group, let's say you're a nonprofit, let's say you're altruistic. Let's say you're a business owner that wants to build housing, but you want to make it affordable. Let's say that you are a city that wants to subsidize housing so it's more affordable. This is the kind of gap you've got to fund for each unit. $100,000. That's huge. That's really big. It didn't stop there, though, right? In this community, we started with a $100,000 gap in 2012. Bam, right? By 2022, it went from $410 to $789. The gap by 2022, $506,000, okay? So if you're thinking that we're going to get out of this by subsidies, if you're thinking, oh, you know what, let's just make this altruistic, okay? Let's just ask somebody to like, hey, can you just cover this? Right? I want to build 100 homes. Can you just cut the price down? Let's just cut the price down and let's just make it affordable. It doesn't work, okay? Really, really, really difficult. We will never have enough money to subsidize under these kinds of conditions. Now, I don't think Taos is this bad, okay? This is really bad. But this could be a place, right? Okay, yeah. Why do homes cost so much? Okay, interest rates, right? We've got interest rates. Oh my gosh, man, the Fed was going to lower the interest rates, now they're rising. They go all over the place. They've been high, they're lower, right? We have no control over interest rates. The labor market, right, a hard thing to deal with. The development market, what's going on with all the development businesses, the financial market, the demand for housing, that's a big one, right? Housing supply. There's a lot of stuff that goes into the price of housing. What I think is important is that a lot of these local communities don't have a lot of control over. Interest rates, we don't have a lot of control over. The labor market, a little bit sometimes, right? You could try to do like some job training programs, things like that. Generally, you don't have a lot of control over that stuff. Development market, financial market, the demand for housing. A lot of times we don't have a lot of control over these kinds of price conditions. We do have a control over housing supply. That's one of the more narrow kinds of things that local community controls development permissions, okay? Local communities get to kind of dictate some of the housing supply, kind of. So it's important to think about these. Econ 101, supply and demand, okay? So if we're looking at supply and demand, high demand, we don't really get to change that much, okay? If Taos was like, you know what, let's approach demand, let's dump all the trash in the streets and let's make it a really crummy place to live, yeah, you could affect demand, okay? Just make it where nobody wants to live here, you could affect demand. Generally, we don't have much control over that. We do kind of have control over supply, okay? And again, there's a lot of ways we could get into supply. I'm really, really simplifying this. We could chat with Lisa about different ways, like how we could like kind of fine tune the market and like play around with stuff. I'm not talking about that stuff. Low supply, high demand, high prices, okay? That's what this means, okay? So yes, we could approach some of this, but this is what we're dealing with, right? This is what we're dealing with. And again, if we want to get into like, let's try to make the market more altruistic. Let's try to have more public housing, nonprofit housing, non-market, non-profit-driven kinds of housing. That's fine. It's hard to get around this, though, right now. This is what we're dealing with. How do we think about supply? Building less housing, high demand, low inventory. This is just an example, again, we were doing for one community, but this is looking at supply. The blue line is super down, really bad. Average months on the market for housing is down, okay? The quarterly absorption rate is really high. So homes are just being sucked up, right? When you see stuff like this, it means that communities don't have a lot of supply. So, going back to little drawings with the happy faces and the people inside of homes. So again, this is adequate housing supply. We're going to look at, again, just kind of different from the videos. I don't have a lot of videos of people chatting, so I make drawings like this. For this, housing shortage, right off the bat, we've got housing groups on all income levels that are missing housing. Okay? Sometimes it's not quite like this. Again, super simplification. Generally, we do see that there's actually still housing shortage up at the top end. There's still a shortage of housing at the top end. And this demand up here for housing at the top end, again, if it's a great investment, that might not actually be a person that wants to move into the house at the top end. Same with here. This might not be a family trying to move into this home. Might not be a family trying to move into this home. If housing is a great investment, this could be a speculative landlord. It could be a speculative person who just wants to park some money and benefit from the super low property taxes that New Mexico has, right? Every single community in New Mexico that we're working with is like, oh my gosh, we've got so many people who buy property and don't do anything with it. Yeah, New Mexico is super low property taxes, right? That's why Texans love buying property in New Mexico, because we've got super low property taxes, okay? Maybe, right, if we want to start chatting with Daniel Werwath and trying to like change how the state works, we could change tax. If we're not talking about that, this is what we're dealing with, okay? Right off the bat, when we're dealing with housing shortage, we've got exclusion, okay? So we've got groups of people that just can't live here. The people on the video, I see all of them here, so they're still kind of here. There's a bunch of people that aren't on the video that moved away. Oh, okay, maybe you don't live here, right? Okay. You're at least visiting. That's good. Okay. But it's not just exclusion, it's also displacement. Okay? So you'll have a higher income household displacing a lower income household. Okay? And this cascades or filters through the market where you've got layers of displacement happening where higher income people can displace lower income people, more exclusion. What also, though, happens then is we have inflated housing costs, right? So when you've got a $3 high-income household that's getting into a kind of mid-range house, it inflates the cost. Not because it's a nicer home, right? That green $2 whatever home didn't become nicer, right? It's just that there's that demand, so the market could support $3. Not because it's a nicer home, just because the market. And so that's the kind of thing that we're seeing in a lot of the communities, is that the value isn't based on like how nice the home is. No, it's based on what the market's willing to pay. Okay? Puts you in a really, really difficult, hard situation. Housing in the market, it's not just about exclusion. We've got economic costs, so commuting costs are really high. These numbers were from Santa Fe, but commuting costs are really high for individuals. Municipalities are losing revenue where those commuters could otherwise be living in the community. Higher infrastructure, construction costs for sprawling development, difficulty attracting employees. One of the biggest things when we're doing economic development plans, especially for rural communities, and we say, hey, what's going on with the economic situation? How can we help with economics? They're like, employees, I need housing. We're like, oh, that's a whole different issue, right? Now we've got to deal with housing. Housing spreads to all these other things. Housing is environmental. We've got commuting polluting, we've got transportation being resource intensive, sprawling development patterns, disconnected families, disconnected community, inequity, segregation, negative health impacts, a lot of different impacts. We know some of these things. Any questions on some of this housing is not necessarily working, not necessarily ideal? I'm going to talk about some of the levers, and then we'll have room for more questions afterwards. Yes?
On the way driving here on said, we pay cash for houses and a phone number. And now I'm thinking my homework is going to be number one, to call it and find out who they are, and number two, that sounds good. We will be there after this.
But your point,
It sounds
yeah.
like an investor who's
Did everyone hear that?
buying houses.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. There are investors that are buying homes, and some of them are mom and pop. You know, they're buying homes, they're flipping it. You know, whatever. But like groups who have $500,000 in their pocket are generally, you know, this is a business, right? Homes are a business. Owning homes, fixing homes, you know, all that stuff becomes a business. And yeah, it's really hard for us to actually get into like, well, your area code is this, so we're going to tax you more. Or like, you can't move, you can't buy it. Like, ownership is really difficult for us to regulate. I'll get into some more of that later. But like, yeah, it's a hard conundrum to deal with. And we're kind of building the market into that. Yeah. Other questions? Going once, going twice. Okay. So levers on housing. I like to think about housing on this kind of continuum on one end, okay, focusing on systemic change and future needs. So the idea here is we could do things like address wealth and income inequality. We could address poverty. We could change the tax structure. We could rewrite the U.S. Constitution. We could change how economics is. That's really difficult to work with, okay? On the other side, focusing on individual support and existing needs, okay? This is a lot of what we think about when we get into affordable housing, okay? This is focusing on the financial and programmatic assistance. This is really, really important, okay? This is triage. This is the hospital ER space. This is the fire department. This is that kind of approach to there's this big need. We're going to do everything we can to take care of those people that need it. Recommendation we have for a lot of these, expand the housing programs and services, okay? We've got things like the housing trust funds. We've got rehabilitation programs, housing choice vouchers, down payment assistance, foreclosure prevention, public housing. These are all really great things that communities need to deal with. I'm not really going to talk about them, okay? Really, really important things. The thing about this is that it's focusing on this individual kind of triage situation. These are doing less to actually change the system, less to change the real problem we're having. In the supply and demand crisis that we see a lot, money is needed, but it's not the solution, right? It helps, but it's not the solution. There's limitations, right? So one of them is it doesn't match the scope, right? So if you've got the $500,000 gap, right, there's not enough money to actually like fix that. The second one, even with financial assistance, some people just can't find places, okay? I've chatted with some homeless groups, and they're like, we're trying to like get more people in homes. I'm like, could you use $1 million? I'm like, no, I need units. I need doors with locks, bathrooms inside of them. I need units. Can we give you money? No, I can't use the money. Sometimes we're giving people vouchers, and they go out and they're trying to find homes. They can't find homes, right? On the video, some people are making good money. They can't find homes. It's not about, it's not about like, let's just, no, there's not enough homes. There's not enough places. So money doesn't solve that. Also, the subsidies are remedying the symptoms, right? The symptoms are that we've got a market that is not providing enough housing for people, and we need to address that. So when we're talking about levers, again, this is really hard to deal with, okay? Yes, like, there are people who are dealing with this. Yes, still deal with this kind of thing, right? This is dynamic, huge social change and rethinking philosophy. Yes, still work on that. There's a lot of groups that are working on this. Yes, we need to work on this. But we also need to work on things that are kind of systemic. So modifying land use regulations, increasing the supply of affordable housing, okay? And again, because I'm talking about more of the market conditions, there's a bunch of stuff that THP and other kinds of groups are trying to creatively come in and say, all right, Instead of modifying land use regulations, how can we provide different kinds of financial and programmatic assistance? How can we massage this in so that we could try to get more affordable housing through nonprofit methods and public methods? All really important. But again, the majority of it is private markets. The majority of it cannot be taken on by Lisa. Okay? Lisa can't do it all. And so we need to be thinking about how the market is actually providing housing. Housing codes, land use codes, zoning codes. Anybody like working with this? Raise your hand. I've got 1, 2. Okay. I do too. Okay? There's almost nobody that likes working with this for a really good reason. It is complicated and it kind of sucks. It's got good intentions, though. Okay, the intentions are it supports community welfare. We all want community welfare. It reduces negative impacts of new development. We like those things, right? There's a good rationale for land use code. The problem is it also gets us exclusionary zoning. I'll talk about what that is. Expensive sprawl. I'll talk a little bit about that. Expensive development, shortage of housing units. Okay, so it gets us a lot of these problems. This isn't my slide. I really liked it, though. Exclusive zones, okay? If you live in a zone where you can't have 3 stories, a 3-story, 20-unit apartment complex, you live in an exclusive zone, right? We try to create these kinds of exclusive zones, again, for really good reasons, but it also excludes people. It excludes kind of housing development. We oftentimes have this kind of anywhere but here kind of thing. Again, I assume this is also in Taos. I haven't read all those newspaper articles that I pulled the headlines from, but it looks like it also is. When we're saying that we don't want housing around our existing areas, we don't want housing around areas where we've got existing infrastructure, it moves out, right? And that anywhere but here kind of attitude means high development housing costs, okay? So it costs a lot of money, actually, to build all this infrastructure. And here's the key that the community should think about more. This infrastructure, developers build, okay? And they're they don't like building it because it's really, really expensive. But then they give it to the community and they say, here you go, community, you can have this. The hard part is that gets into less financial sustainability. So when a developer just gives you all of this free infrastructure, you have to maintain that, right? A developer's like, here's $3 million of roads. That's $3 million that taxpayers are going to have to be funding and keeping up with. Usually tax revenue, for residential especially, almost never actually pays for the long-term maintenance costs, okay? For greenfield development and stuff like that, it's really hard to deal with that stuff. It's also environmental sustainability. So when we're having all of this extra infrastructure, using all of this extra land, that kind of sprawling pattern has environmental consequences. We have tried to work with, there's a lot of groups that have tried to kind of get into some of this. So I want to focus on some of, again, like how the market is thinking about some of this and how communities can kind of work their levers. One is approval process. And trying to have more efficient approval processes, okay? So again, this was one example we did. We were looking at how different timelines affect the cost of resulting housing. I did not look into the reasons why or any of that rationale, but I was looking at some of that, and it was like back in 2008 or something. It's like somebody started proposing it, okay? Maybe that's not when you start the clock, but like development costs a lot of money, okay? And I'm not saying that was a good or a bad project. I'm not like, you know, I'm just saying that when we have really long entitlement periods, it has a lot of costs associated with it. If you could reduce those kinds of entitlement periods, if projects get a yes or no quicker, it can make it a lot cheaper to get housing. It's a somewhat significant cost. A big one, density. So density drives a lot of affordability. You don't always think about this very much, but density is really, really key to affordability. And it isn't always just how you kind of fit the units. It's that when you're doing, so in this model over here, we've got 1 acre, and on that 1 acre, we've got 1 unit. Okay? For this model, we were saying that's probably going to $783,000 thing. We've got a lot of infrastructure. It's also probably a big unit, right? When we're doing zoning and development, usually we'll have something.
Sorry to interrupt. Be super quick.
Thank you very much. If you're allowed to build 1 unit, only 1 unit on 1 acre, and it costs a lot of money to do, are you going to build a 750 square foot little casita? No. You're going to build the biggest, most expensive, most profitable kind of home you can, right? If you're building 10 units per acre, you can't. They've got to be smaller. You're also sharing all that infrastructure. You're sharing all that development. Again, these are kind of back of the napkin, like Play-Doh kind of numbers, but it gets us something. Going from the 1 acre, one dwelling unit per acre to 10 dwelling units per acre, got a 49% cost decrease, projected 49% cost decrease in this community. From $783,000 per unit to a little under $400,000. Okay? Density can be key to actually getting affordability. If you could find places where you could fit a lot of different homes into an area, this doesn't always work well with what the community wants. Okay? This isn't always what the market wants. I was chatting in Los Alamos, and it was interesting. Everybody in Los Alamos, or a lot of people in Los Alamos, want a pool. They want 2,000 square feet, and they want a 2-car garage. And I was like, great. So does that mean that that's what you're going to build? Everybody might want that. Are they willing to take anything else? Right? We could build in different kinds of ways to actually get more affordable kinds of housing. That is something that the local community has the control over. When we're looking at recommendations for market kind of things, it has to be comprehensive. On the right side here, housing programs and services. Okay? A lot of the stuff that, again, I mentioned, I didn't talk about before, I'm not talking about now, still important. Housing trust funds, rehabilitation, land disposition, public development, loan programs, rental, developer, assistance, public housing, all of these things really, really important. They help satisfy the needs for the people that need it right now, help band-aid the solution, help triage the solution, help get people the help that they need. On the housing supply side, that's changing the system, okay? That's trying to change what are the suggested densities that are going in, how are we dealing with different kinds of incentives, land use incentives to actually build more of these kinds of things? How are we trying to have more equity within land use codes, more affordability in land use codes? Usually land use codes are focused on property values. They're focused on minimizing impacts. They're focusing on reducing the kind of development. You could do the opposite, right? That's all you, right? That is all you. You get to decide how you want your land use code to function. You get to decide what you want to focus on. You get to decide whether you're focusing on affordability or equity. You know, all of those different things, that's all you. That is all you. It's not the state, it's not the federal government, it's not any of that other stuff. It's relatively cheap. It's really hard to actually get the capacity to do it, but it's relatively cheap and low cost for public entities. So again, some of the strategies to increase accessibility. On the top end, a lot of this is just allowing market development, okay? And I don't always like this, okay? I don't always think, I definitely don't think that we should always be subsidizing, the development of luxury housing. I don't always like catering to kind of luxury housing demands, but it's kind of important. We kind of have to allow some of that stuff. On this middle end, allowing more efficient land use. It's not just all the land use, it's not just the luxury. Allowing it to be efficient A lot of times we're prohibiting that kind of efficiency. If you allow that kind of efficiency and maybe provide incentives or other recommendations, things like that, you could actually get more of that moderate kind of cost housing. On the lower end, providing mainly more of the land use incentives and subsidies. So this is, trying to incentivize on that lower end, trying to get some of the supply on that lower end, allowing the market to do some of it on the top end. And that's a way that we could get a lot more of that kind of supply there. That's the end of what I have to talk about. So, questions. And I'm going to bring Lisa up too, because I am almost certain you guys are going to have questions about Taos specific. Lisa knows about Taos specific. Yeah.
There's a relatively recent development in Albuquerque where the community trust owns the land. Can you comment about how that addresses or doesn't any of these ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a lot of this stuff. That is public groups coming in and saying, it might cost a lot of money to build this, but we're gonna use some incentives or subsidies. We're not going to play the market. We're going to try to lower our costs. We are going to take grants and public funds to reduce the cost of the housing we're providing, and we're going to try to provide that at lower rates. There's also a lot of ownership models you could do where you kind of withdraw that from kind of market exposure so that it kind of stays at the price, right?
They don't own the land, they only own the home, right?
So you could have things where like the individual owns the home, they don't own the land. The land is owned by land trust, right? And so they have kind of decided the land will not increase in value, or it will only increase by 3%. Maybe the home will only increase by, whatever. So that's providing these different non-market-based approaches. I think those are awesome ways to, again, get out of this system, right? This is a difficult system to work with. Awesome ways to get outside of that. The hard part is capacity. A lot of times it's capacity. Lots of legal agreements to make those things happen, sometimes a lot of money to make this happen, politics to make this happen, organizations. You need skilled people who are working with a lot of folks who are building up that capacity. A lot of stuff has to start going into those. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you familiar at all with the recent Zillow report about essentially commodification and the work of Chuck Collins at Institute for Public Studies?
I'm familiar with parts of that. I'm familiar with how housing has become a lot more commodified, stuff like that. Yeah.
That's all. I just wondered, if you were familiar with the work, particularly with Chuck Collins, who addresses inequality, housing, the wealth gap. There's a recent report out. I'm sure that if you search his name, Chuck Collins, it's the Institute for Policy Studies, or maybe it's economic something in the title. I'm not sure. Chuck Collins.
Okay. Yeah.
The Zillow report, the real estate report.
Yeah. But yeah, and that gets into, when we're talking about wealth inequality, because wealth is a big part of this too. Wealth is, again, can't really be understated how important wealth is. It's just a really hard thing to actually work with. And when we have market conditions like we do, it's really hard to filter out wealth. Yeah.
I've done a lot of work on Native American reservations in situations where the federal government owns the trust land, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it pretty much blocks them out from getting any kind of financing to be able to build. I'm just wondering if there's any examples of situations where a land trust might allow people to build a house on there, but if it's occupied and it's the primary residence, allowing the value to increase of the house over time.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of...
people to build generational wealth and get themselves out of that situation.
Right. There's also, so you could do different kinds of restrictions or covenants on how much you could kind of benefit from the value of owning. There's also really interesting ways that some communities have tried to deal with rent too. Again, I'm not, very, very political when we start talking about like how we want to regulate ownership and profits and how businesses work and stuff like that. But like some communities have tried to say that, rent can only increase X amount per month. We're not going to cap, rent, but we are going to try to limit how much it's changing. That's also something that, if you own the property and you're kind of going through some kind of nonprofit community ownership groups, collective ownership, public ownership, whatever, you can put kinds of restrictions on that where, maybe it increases by inflation plus 2%, but no more. Yeah.
I'm out in Cerro, and there are a lot of empty places. Do you think it'd be fair to do a call for artists and tell them, watch the scene in Milagro Beanfield or go on your own places urban craft in a place?
Yeah, if you could get people to start using vacant homes, that's huge. And a lot of that gets other slides, talking about like rehabilitation. So programs where you're rehabilitating, sometimes for those things, it's a problem with roofs. Sometimes it's a problem with utility connections. Sometimes it's a problem with insulation, whatever.
Family fights over who inherited.
Yeah. Sometimes you can have groups come in and try to help get that ownership. When people just don't want to use it as a home, it's hard to force that. Really hard to kind of force people to do that. But voluntary programs where you could try to do that. I've also seen some communities that try to do incrementally requiring code requirements. So like, we're not going to require you to come up to code right now, but after you start making money off this project, then you will have to over time. A lot of creative ways to do that, but it's hard to make some of those work. Do you have any comments? Yeah.
We're going to pass the microphone for questions. Right here.
First of all, thanks a lot for your talk. I appreciate it a lot. I have two questions. The first one is about your plot of the median house cost as a function of time. I'm curious if the average is the same as well. So if the shape of the distribution is the same, or whether we skew it towards more expensive homes over time as well, because the median wouldn't tell you that.
I wasn't listening. Sorry, it's been a really long day. I wasn't.
This is a type of distribution, if you look at it sideways. Is it the case that the number of houses with the $3 signs is increasing as well as a function of time, rather than just the middle?
I think you're talking about the median sales price versus average sales price. Oh, yeah, usually it's homes are increasing at the top, right? And we're getting more homes at the top. Still a shortage, but we're getting more homes at the top. We are not getting these kinds of things. And we could look at that in two different ways. One of them is just like the price, right? And again, it's harder to build at this kind of price than at that price, right? If you're a business, if almost all the housing being built is built for a business, it makes sense to do that. And we're not providing any kind of regulatory incentives or any kind of benefit. We are encouraging people to build this, right? They do that more. The other thing is thinking about like missing middle housing, if anybody is familiar with that term. But we have generally made it a lot more difficult to provide the kinds of duplexes, quadplexes, 3-story kind of smallish kind of housing. We saw a lot of that like in different eras of development, and a lot of those have actually been kind of prohibited through zoning codes since the 20s, 30s, 50s, 70s, 80s kinds of things. We just haven't been allowing that kind of housing that's efficient. Yeah.
The second question is, what is the percentage of unoccupied housing in Taos County?
We've got numbers on that.
Alexander, do you know that? It's 42%. Thank you, Lindsay.
Demand picture isn't actually really the case then, is it?
It depends. It really depends. Because the kind of housing, so a vacant home doesn't mean it's actually available. Right? So if you've got a lot of homes that are like, it's there, it's an empty home, right? We're talking about like an empty home somewhere. If it's not actually on the market, then like it's not actually functioning like a market home, right? It's not participating. Yeah. And that's again, like, we might have vacant homes that are just being like owned, but if no one's living in them, like, unfortunately, they're still taking up spots. And unless we de-incentivize that kind of thing, like, they're just taking up spots. That sucks. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so could you speak about any developments you're familiar with that have restrictive covenants that limit ownership to workforce type housing, workforce, customers?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna direct it over to. Do you want to talk about this, or Lisa? Do you want to talk about this?
Come on up, Daniel.
Okay. Daniel built a project recently that is restricted. Yeah.
Yeah, do you mind repeating that just so I can make sure I address it well?
Well, I handed the microphone back, so
Okay.
I will talk louder. So my question is about if you could speak to the success or failure of developments that are restricted for workforce housing. So it'd be like teachers, firefighters, plumbers, electricians, people who work in the community and support other industries. And have they been successful in with those kind of restricted covenants on certain developments with those restrictions?
Sure. I guess I would say the best way to help those people is to add moderate priced housing supply, right? I think those targeted solutions are oftentimes triage for a larger unhealthy housing market. And sort of as Carlos alluded to earlier, they create a future administrative burden, right? And we sort of create this other class of ownership for specific groups of people, right? It's one of the challenges I have around sort of land trust models, where we're saying, oh, you're lower income, maybe you don't get the full value of your home increase. When we think about things like lower income people are actually the folks that need the biggest leg up when you think about sort of equity in housing, right? So maybe like, yeah, let's make land trusts for those $800,000 houses and restrict their equity, right? I mean, I don't know, like flip it around. So like, I don't know, I come from a big background in working with deed restricted housing, affordable housing programs, developing affordable housing. A lot of times those mechanisms are really important mechanisms for preserving community resources around housing, recycling those resources. I tend to like sort of second mortgage mechanisms more than deed restriction mechanisms because they do limit what you could do with properties. And I know I ran a land trust for a period of time, right? So I saw a 30-year-old land trust house that has a perpetual affordability requirement and $60,000 worth of deferred maintenance and a mandate to sell to another low-income buyer creates, which no one has thought about, contemplate, funded, administratively funded. So like one of the things that I think is like our whole approach around programmatizing housing, right? We see this happening right now as higher and higher income people need help to buy housing. We're essentially just saying, oh, now we're going to make programs up to 150% of median income, right? Well, it creates...
Which are the new changes we've kind of been doing. And now Opportunity Enterprise Revolving Fund goes up to what percentage?
300% of
300% AMI.
Yeah.
So we basically said, we need public subsidies to do this. Actually, we need public subsidies to fund this. Actually, we need public subsidies to fund all this, right? And like it's a small amount of butter on a large piece of bread.
And what I would say, spread resources out more thinly. The challenge with that too, as you go up in income, is that you tend to pull resources away from the most economically vulnerable people, and that's the really, really challenging part, right? So I think like in general, when you start to get into acute affordability issues, you do need to look at protecting special populations of people, right? You need a triage approach. You need to make sure you have teachers. You need to make sure victims of domestic violence aren't staying with abusers because they can't afford a place to move to, right? But programmatic solutions like that, I mean, I think workforce housing, what we're doing at the state, what Carlos referred to was a fund we just created this last legislative session to finance the construction of entry-level housing, right? And it's not necessarily a direct subsidy, but it's trying to finance it without too many strings. So I think all this stuff just comes down to a balance of administrative burdens, complexity, what kind of opportunities you're creating for people in those situations. But I think it is, in a situation like you're in this community right now, appropriate to think about triaging, that your public employees need extra support right now to keep their jobs, that you need teachers, that youth are at especially high risk of homelessness. These are things you have to think about programmatically, but they aren't necessarily a replacement for trying to fix the underlying problems, because we just literally can't subsidize our way out of this. The cost is too great.
And to summarize just a little bit, I have seen where for kind of workforce housing, again, the moderate kind of income household, the household that's making more than average kind of wages, where you do try to build for that, maybe subsidize that, try to make sure that that's there. But yeah, not necessarily having like a whole program that's keeping that in a deed restricted way for that. Yes, we do still need to support that, encourage that, subsidize that sometimes. Ideally, we wouldn't, right? But when the need is huge, we kind of we could justify that. But ideally, we want to have less of the programs around that, less of the subsidies around that.
I'd say the one other area where you think about that is where you can leverage direct support from an entity that's interested. So if you're, say, yeah, we're going to build nurses' housing, but we're going to work with the hospital to build it on land they own, right? That's a great example of where those types of things work really well, because you're bringing new resources to the table to take care of a problem for a specific affinity group. So that tends to work a little better. I think the big thing too that I would just say in relation to sort of what Carlos was talking about in a bigger sense and the way we think about land use and zoning, because this is something I'm really preoccupied with at the state level, these systems issues that we have. Our housing delivery system isn't working right now, right? It's not delivering the housing that we want for normal people at costs they can afford. Land use and zoning, I think we think about a lot as a way we segregate uses, we protect public interest, we manage aesthetics and the quality, neighborhood character, right? Our big placeholder word for, I'm not going to go down that path, but it's also how we point the market, right? And we have to change how we think about land use and zoning. Home builders are no more greedy than the giant food monopolies that we shop at, which are called grocery stores. We just think about housing in a really different way. We treat it differently, and we make it a lot harder to do. But the thing that comes down to, and in Carlos's example, the finer point I'd add to the low density versus high density, when you're low density, your incentive is to build the biggest, most expensive house possible. When you're high density, your incentive is to build the most units possible, right? And that leads to this natural affordability. And home builders are no more greedy or less greedy than any other capitalistic institution that I'm aware of. But they respond to these regulatory frameworks that we create. And we need to think about these regulatory frameworks as ways that we point the market, not just govern aesthetics and separate incompatible uses in communities. That's really how we have to start thinking about these frameworks and what they achieve and how they work with the market to get these things done. Because I'm guessing, there's a great older tradition in New Mexico that many people built their own houses, but for most other people, someone built your house. And it's the same people that we villainize when they come to build the next houses. And I've seen it. I worked for a nonprofit in Santa Fe that built an affordable housing development. We actually had people from the development come out and fight a future development, right? This is it's in our soul that we are confused by change. No, it's like hunter-gatherers, the spring's drying up. We got to get the hell out of here, but I own this house. I'm going to fight for it. So we just got to really think about this. We got to think about what things like adding housing and who it's for and the type of housing we build, right? When you build smaller, more modest housing, that's housing for locals, not Californians, right? When you have a scarce environment, you're essentially saying only wealthy people are going to be able to access our housing market. So that's my big pitch on the land use and zoning side of this. We're working on this at the state. We're working on ways to facilitate helping local governments be better at land use and zoning. We're looking at communities that are doing really bad at this, that maybe we may have to take away some of their ability to manage land use and zoning if they're not going to do it better, right? I think we have to look at some of those things if we're going to get out of this. Because right now we're just not meeting the needs with our current systems.
There was an urgent question back there.
Sorry.
You're right in the blinding light.
We get out of this.
I don't know where to talk into this. I can talk loud too. I used to teach. I'm on the board of the Taos Land Trust, and there is a move across the country, as I use the term community trust in Albuquerque, and I would ask that you not use the term land trust. There is a move to distinguish land trust from community trust, which own land for housing purposes. So please don't use land trust for that.
I can talk about this at length if you want to. I mean, yes, there was a movement of community land trusts that started in the 90s. Most of them have failed. There's a handful of them that still exist. It's an idea that's coming back up. It's an important idea. It's part of a range of strategies. I think like models like, what's the one in Denver? The big one that does, the big one. I think it's a strategy, it's a management scheme. It's essentially like a way of managing housing and housing affordability. It's a complex one with like lots of implications. And it's important in a range of strategies. It's just not a singular solution. And it's not like, it's just like rent control. Like if, you've got 10 people who want pizzas and 5 pizzas, like controlling the price of pizzas still doesn't help people. It's like we've got to understand the bigger piece of this and get behind solving supply stuff. And if people want to enter into alternative ownership structures where they're giving up rights to equity and things like that in exchange for other things, I think it's really great. I just worked with a ton of people who came out of owning a land trust home for 10 years. I never met a single one that was happy to learn they weren't getting their equity. Community land trust. Yeah, CLT. Yep. I
just want to add this because I think the point is that if anything from tonight, it's that we have to, and we as the community, we as everyone in this room, we have to look at every single possible strategy. It is never going to be one solution. And just, Lynn, I wanted just to let you know that when we started Taos Housing Partnership in phase 1, we looked at that model, and it wasn't great. Not we, 2 people. It kind of came forward. I will tell you there is a member of our community who has a very large piece of property who is very interested in turning that into that type of model. And I'm going to say yes, please go research that because we need that in the context of all of this. Yep. So I just want to really highlight the fact that we have looked at those. It didn't make it into Taos Housing Partnership strategy at the time we put everything together, but I don't want to dismiss that because it may work in some communities for some people.
And I would say that's a great point, and I'll reinforce that. It works really great in certain situations. One of the land trust properties that I worked on that I really love is in Hakona and Poake, and it was a donated property. It's got a 3-acre working organic farm. There are situations when it worked. It worked really good because a woman donated the property to make it happen, right? It doesn't work if you're paying for the land because you're basically saying, give me hundreds of thousands of dollars of subsidy. We're going to bury it in the ground in perpetuity. And just in terms of a situation you're in, it's not the best use of funds in terms of like getting affordability off the ground. But if you have an asset, if you have an affinity person who wants to donate a piece of land, it is a really great strategy. And you've got to build an intentional community. Those are people who want to live together. Those are people who are exchanging a quality of life and a certain like culture that they want to create in exchange for some of those other things that other people may want, like wealth building or being able to move up in house size down the road. Because those are the other challenges we see, right? Is like, if you've got a growing family, a land trust isn't a great idea because you're going to have limited equity and you're not going to be able to move into a bigger house if your family grows, right? So it's just those types of balances. There's right tools for right places. The most number of strategies possible. Be wary of anyone who's selling you a singular solution because there's none. That's like the number one thing we can say in housing.
Before we continue, I'm fine staying. I just want to do a time check because we are at 7 o'clock. So we're sort of asking if we're okay. We have 5 minutes. 4 minutes, and then we can continue in the parking lot, which is where all the work happens anyway. Yeah, we'll take a couple more questions.
I just want to say that the oldest houses in this state were high-density units, high-density buildings, right? So I'm just going to say this is not new.
Famous ones, just up
not
the road
new
here.
concepts. And then I just had a question about the next steps in the plans and if there was an intentional evaluation of the land use codes as they stand. It's my understanding that some of them may even contradict themselves within a municipality or county. I know the fire truck one kind of came up a couple years ago, and then was also wondering if, in addition to locally evaluating those codes and stuff, if there is kind of a coordinated effort at the state to kind of get everybody looking at these things.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, so that's a really great question. So at the state level, yes, and we're actually about to kick off a working group on this. And so we're looking at what other states have done around this, particularly Montana, Colorado, Arizona, who've really led around this and sort of implementing best practices. And so we're going to get a working group. Carlos is hopefully going to be our consultant that's supporting that work. And then we're going to have some national experts that we're going to bring in to talk about this. Like I was just in a meeting yesterday with most of the housing advisors for every governor in the state, right? And we're hearing from experts, and they're like, did you know that the U.S. elevator standard is twice the size of every other country in the United States? We have like a unique elevator standard to make elevators like $1 million. And, you know, there's all these things we do. So we're going to be looking at building codes. So looking at things like single-stair apartments and how do we reduce the cost of some of those multi-unit housing things, but also land use and zoning, things like requiring, maybe even looking at requiring certain standards around how often you update these things, how well does your, you know, some states have done stuff where they're like, does your zoning context support your housing needs? And requires local governments to have very detailed housing need data. So when a project comes up for approval, you're looking at it in the context of like, oh, we need X thousand numbers of units and we've approved 28 this year. And you can also look at the next level and say, we have this much land zoned at this density. Can this support the growth we need to meet the needs of the community around housing? So absolutely stuff we're looking at. I don't know about the local stuff. We looked at it a little bit, I think. I mean, it's obviously something we've, in the planning stages, noted as a priority.
But Daniel and the state do not control local land use.
No.
THB does not control local land use.
Who does?
These guys.
I'm actually going to cut us off on Q&A at this point because I do want to finish with one of our videos.
Oh, yeah.
The other piece that I just want to say, I am going to make a really huge assumption, and it's probably 100% accurate, that every single person in this room learns one thing that you did not know when you walked in this door. Yes. And you have all figured out what your next action step is. Either I'm going to go to Taos Housing Partnership and I'm going to sign up to their e-newsletter because I want to know the next time we do this again. And I'm just going to say in my closing remarks that, Carlos, whether you like it or not, you're part of Taos Housing Partnership team. Anything in this work, it's that there is not one entity that does all the work. It is not government's responsibility. It will not be the builder, my husband up there. It will not be developers. It will not be Taos Housing Partnership. It is every single person coming together to say, how do we make this stuff happen? Please go to Taos Housing Partnership's website. Please check out our 3-year roadmap because we have a really robust, amazing strategy plan. And a lot of the stuff is in here. So we're going to keep these conversations going. The two things I want to say before we hit the play button is land use codes. So county commissioners, county has their comprehensive plan that's been in active mode the last couple of months. They're working on land use codes. The town of Taos is going to start working on their land use codes. This is the kind of stuff community can help fill that conversation in around what we want in those codes. Because you saw those, I love the one screen that showed, oh, here's all the programmatic stuff, and I went, yep, that's Taos Housing Partnership. I'm on that end. All that stuff in the middle around land use, those are our government partners. That's the partnership together. So please check out those opportunities, check out our website, and I think we can just hit play. We will hang out for a little bit if you do have immediate questions for any of our team members, any of my Taos Housing Partnership board members, and I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here tonight, because this is fantastic.
think if Taos had the housing that we needed at the levels that people can afford, it would really transform this community. We would be able to recruit and retain the workforce that we need.
I foresee that we would have a lot less homeless people. There would be a lot less families living in cars.
There'd be a lot less stress in the people I know. I think people would be able to spend more time with their families.
We would have more things for young people to do, reasons for them to come back.
Taos could be a beacon of hope. I think it could be an example of what a sustainable and equitable place could look like that not only considers economics and profit margins, but also the people who make it the place that it is.
I think that we'd have healthy individuals. We all know that housing is vital. It's necessary for health, and I think that we'd see a much more vibrant, healthy community.
One of my biggest dreams, besides growing my own food on my land, was having some housing available for anyone who is going through anything, so they have a safe place to stay for the night or for the week.
There's a lack of people being able to help because they're just working so hard to make their ends meet. So I think that we'd see a lot of people helping each other out.
If I had a magic wand for housing, I would wave it over some of the open spaces we have in our more dense places, and I would instantly have lovely homes sprout up, a mix of them, and they would all be resilient, energy efficient, and prepared for the climate situation that we're facing.
Just to think about what it would mean to have a hospital that was fully staffed, to have our educational institutions fully staffed, full-time teachers in every classroom instead of substitutes, qualified teachers and professors at UNM, a town and county government that have fully staffed departments that are able to provide services to the community. It could be huge.
Is it easy? Nope, it's going to be hard. And we're going to be wiping sweat off our brow, and we're going to be lamenting about how hard it is. But at some point, we're going to have to deal with the challenges, which are we have to build someplace. And how are we going to tackle that?